Hello, hello, hello. My name is Robert. I am the recovery guy, and you have entered into The Fix.
My name is Robert Pardon. I am a recovered alcoholic, and it's good to see you tonight. You know, Whitney, our friend, was going to introduce me, and she wasn't able to make it this evening. And after messaging Jason, Mitch seemed so appropriate because Alcoholics Anonymous, every one of us in this room has been a newcomer at one time or another. We just didn't wake up and we have 12 years or 15 years or, in my case, 39 years. We do it one day at a time. And so if you're new or relatively new to the program, really want to welcome you. To the degree that you find the fellowship so embracing, that you find the fellowship so comforting, that you'll stick around long enough for the roots of recovery to take place. And Mitch is a perfect example of that. When I met Mitch of Recovery Ways up in Salt Lake City, I understood that he was coming down to Utah County. And right away I thought of Jason, who in this area is known for service. And I knew that if I could get Mitch connected to Jason and his family, that if Mitch did the things he was supposed to do, he would get well. And so to hear him say that he is a recovered alcoholic doesn't surprise me a bit, because he hangs out with people who are actively involved in recovery that allows us to recover one day at a time. And what we recover from is a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We never recover from the phenomenon of craving. That is always a part of our DNA. But the hopeless state of mind and body that says we will never be more than we are, that as much as we are presently like other people, or presently maybe has to be smashed, that notion that we can't get well has to be smashed at the same time. And that's what we recover from. We never recover from the disease of alcoholism, because once again, I don't think I ever want to recover. I don't want to ever successfully drink, because if I could drink, then I would stop. I would stop doing steps 10, 11, and 12, which keep me on the path of recovery one day at a time. And so, once again, if you're new or relatively new, we didn't have to reinvent Alcoholics Anonymous when you got here. There was already a plan in place, just like there was for me in April of 1986 when I conceded to my innermost self that I was alcoholic. This is the first step in recovery. They didn't have to say Robert's sicker than others. I'm not saying I wasn't, but they didn't have to have a different path for me any more than they had to have a different path for Jason or Marshall or anyone else in this room, Alexa, anyone else, Rhonda. They didn't have to come up with another plan, Trey. They just knew that if we applied the plan that we could, that we followed along the way, then you had an opportunity to get well. Any more than my sponsor at 45 years, my friend Ed, who just celebrated 59 years. The same plan, the same process for each and every person is the process that we all go through. And if you don't have a sponsor, get a sponsor. If you don't have a big book, get a big book. You know, this idea that just go to meetings and you'll be okay, that's a myth. Because I've seen more people, including myself, who went to scores of meetings but never surrendered to the disease of alcoholism, were never really ready to get honest with themselves or another human being. Until we're ready to do that, we will stay sick, because we're only as sick as our secrets. And I had so many things that I kept just with me, which was the reason I was in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous in the first place. So based on good sponsorship, countless treatment centers that I've been in, the big book, the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, and a loving God as he would express himself in our group conscience. I haven't found it necessary to drink since April 25th of 1986. That gives me 14,247 days in a row. That's the key. In a row. If you don't do it in a row, then it doesn't count as much. And there were times I wasn't sure that I wanted to stay sober. There were times where I didn't want to be as honest as necessary to have what you have. But I wanted it more than I wanted to go get drunk. You know, I was in Las Vegas a few weeks ago, and I lived and drank in Las Vegas for 6.5 years, and before I got sober. And I tell people all the time, it turned a fender bender into a full head-on collision. Because when you drink and you use in a 24-hour town with no rules, man, it's the perfect place for an alcoholic. Fortunately, it was the perfect place for a person who wanted to be a treated alcoholic. Because some of the best AA I'd ever seen has been in Las Vegas, Nevada. And the reason for that is there is no door number 3. You either get well or you die, like one of our friends did over this weekend. One of my dear friends is here tonight, and her father passed away as a result of alcoholism. And there's nothing worse than dying from a treatable condition. There's nothing worse than having hope just around the corner, and yet we don't approach our life as if there's any hope. That's why we recover from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. We were never without hope. It just seemed that way. And we lived that lie, and the pain of that lie is so severe that it needs medication. And I'll tell you what, there's nothing that medicated me more than Johnny Walker Black. You know, than a good Scotch on the rocks. Boy, you know, it says in the big book, it says that the feeling, the sensation would come upon me at once by taking the first few drinks. Now, we know that alcohol takes a while to process through the system to begin to settle me down, to begin to medicate me. But just knowing that I could take a drink was all I needed to do. And that was all I needed. But when what you need is destroying you and you can't see it, or you at least don't admit it, you end up with lives that we have. I mean, how many people here have a marriage or a relationship that could have been salvaged had you not drunk? How many people in this room tonight would have kept your job had you not been drunk? How many people wouldn't have been asked not to come back by family members had you not been so addicted to alcohol and to other drugs? Every single one of us in this room. Because unless you're monitoring the class for college credit, you're probably here because you're alcoholic. And if you're here because you're alcoholic, you probably need a plan of recovery. And we have a plan of recovery. We have a plan of recovery that, in the beginning, the second tradition would state that 50% of those who really tried got well and recovered. 25% after they went back out recovered never to drink again. That's 75% of the people who came to Alcoholics Anonymous in the beginning. The forward to the second edition, I think, was published in 1971. So in 1971, 75% of people who came into Alcoholics Anonymous never drank again. What are our stats today? Not even close. The program hasn't changed. We've changed. We seem to think that I need more evidence to prove that I can't drink like a normal person. I need a fourth marriage. I need to lose another job. I need to be asked not to come back again. Then, no, that's just a myth. Because once we take that first drink, we're doomed. We stand no chance. That's why every person who is alcoholic, as we are alcoholic, can never safely consume alcohol again. And once again, I'm glad I can't drink. Because if I could drink, I probably wouldn't do step 10. And I guarantee you, if I'm not doing step 10, I'm not doing step 11. And if I'm not doing step 11, I could give a rip about what message you hear. Because I got better things to do, and that's me. Right? And there's nothing, it's amazing. Nowadays, we think we need to be a better person before we have value to others. The truth is, we're of value to others, then we become a better person. I've heard people say all the time, I just want to be a better dad. I just want to be a better husband. I just want to be a better friend. I want to be a better employee. Just get sober. The sober version of who we are is automatically a better version. Isn't it? We have a tendency to show up when we're supposed to show up, where we're supposed to show up. I tell people all the time, if I could drink tonight and show up where I'm supposed to and wake up with who I'm supposed to wake up with and be where I'm supposed to be, I would probably drink. But I know that can't occur. I tried it. In the beginning, my first 12-step meeting was Gamblers Anonymous, because in Las Vegas, it's gamble all the time and drink all the time because they have free drinks. They don't tell you that it'll cost you your home. They don't tell you that it'll cost you your job, but the drinks are free. And in the meantime, we're losing paycheck after paycheck. So this is how my thinking was. I went to Gamblers Anonymous because I thought if I could just stop gambling, I would slow my drinking down to a manageable point, and then my life would get better. But you know what I found? I found the less I gambled, the more I drank isolationist. The more I started drinking in my car, the more I started drinking at home, the more I started drinking in places that I wouldn't drink before because I wasn't in a casino gambling. And the alcoholism just seemed to progress to the point where on February 9th of 1986, I looked in the mirror. And do you ever hear voices? I would hear voices all the time. And most of the voices would say, Bobby, 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 what are you doing? Because everyone was amazed that I could deny my condition and forsake everything of value in my life. Jobs, wives, walk down on kids, you name it. Disappointed parents, family members galore, friends would stop coming around and say, you drink a little bit too much. I used to do so much math. Check this out. This is so funny. I think it's hilarious. But it shows you how much we would drink and use. Well, I got kicked out of Sam's Town, and I didn't know it until I went back. Okay, that's a sidebar. And when you get 86 from a casino, and you don't know until you go back, and then you say, I was never kicked out of here, I was never here, and they show you a picture of yourself. So that's how much I drank. But I used to hang out with these guys who cooked meth, and they asked me not to come back because I snorted too much. And do you know another despicable character in the world than a guy who cooks meth? They're like the worst of the worst. And they wouldn't let me come around because I used way too much. But I did everything alcoholically. There was no brakes to this engine. And by the time I got in front of the mirror on February 9th of 1986, those voices I said I heard were no longer there. I was 32 years old, and I was going to die. And there was nothing I could do about it. Because for years, I had been taken out of the equation of whether or not I was going to drink. I was no longer part of the decision making. In Japan, they say first a man takes a drink, then the drink takes a drink, then the drink takes the man. Well, the drink started to take a drink when I was 18, and the drink took the man when I was 26. So 6 years of being out of the equation. It wasn't a matter of if I was going to drink. It was a matter of how soon I was going to drink that day. When was the safest place? How much, where I was going to drink. But whether or not I was going to drink was already answered, because by the time I passed out at 11 o'clock at night, I'd wake up about 8 o'clock in the morning. I had gone 7 hours without drinking, 8 hours without drinking. I started to metabolize. And there's a thing called the set point. And your body regulates when you get to a certain degree. That's why step 2 is there. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. It's not before step 1. We don't start feeling the infect and the insanity until we're not drinking. And so all I could go was 7 or 8 hours, and then the craving would begin. And many of you are like that. There's some similarities that really make us very textbook. That's why the solution that worked for Jason works for me. That's why the solution for Trey or Rhonda works for us all. You know, when Alyssa came in, we didn't have to tell her, you're pretty sick, although she probably is. We didn't have to say, we've got the solution for you, just for you, a tailored solution. In chapter 2, it says there is a solution. There's not 40 solutions. There's one solution, because there's a commonality between all of us that works for everything. They told me in the beginning, if you're not sure you're an alcoholic, stick around because you'll do till one shows up. They saw me coming. And you know, you could have saw me coming when I was 5, when I was 6 years old, because something was wrong already. I never fit anywhere. And I'm talking about in our family. Remember back when you started to get uncomfortable? Many of us remember 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. We're a child. And yet we already know something is different about us. We just feel disjointed. We don't feel as loved. We don't feel as appreciated. We don't feel as wanted as siblings who grew up right next to us. And by the time we hit that magic age, and most alcoholics, most of us began to drink when we were 14 to 16 years old. That's when many of us took our first drink. And you know, I would tell people very often, the first time I drank was to get away with it. The second time I drank is because I remembered what happened to me the first time I drank. Everything, remember that first drink? How everything just slowed down? And no matter how crazy your life was, it was now okay. Because now we didn't know it, but there was an answer to the problem. You know, Father Martin says that alcohol would put to sleep that which would make us feel uncomfortable. And it's okay if we're uncomfortable with the person, place, or thing. We can go away from them. We can change that. But what if what we're uncomfortable with is us? What if the insanity is with us, within us? That's why we have to concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. This was the first step in recovery. And the insanity was me. I just had to slow my world down. And alcoholism is so progressive that even though I was a periodic between 14 and 18 years old, it didn't take very long for the drink to take the drink. And I was off to the races. I tell people that I dropped out of high school when I was 18 years old because I could. I was so defiant by that time. That attitude of I'll show you, I'll kill me, was becoming more prevalent in my life. And I was so proud the day I dropped out of school. I went into the registrar's office at Corvallis High School. I moved from Southern California, which is another therapeutic story. And I still think I need therapy for that. So here I am at Corvallis High School, January of 1972, January 3rd to be specific. And I went to the register marshal and I said, I'm dropping out of high school. And they said, no, you can't. And I held up my license. I said, I can do whatever I want. I'm 18 years old. And that was my attitude. I didn't know at the time it was because I wanted to drink. I wanted to remove all the shackles, all the barriers that separated me from a drink. I didn't know that then because I thought it was you. I didn't know it was about me. And so at this time, we try to figure out things that are going to fix us. So we try different relationships. We try different jobs. We have this wonderful word in AA called geographics, right? Where we move thinking, if I just land in another place, things are going to be better. But we show up the same time the problem does. And no matter what relationship I was in, where I worked, who I worked with, who I hung out with, it was all the same. Because I had a pattern by this time. I didn't hang out with you if you didn't have something I wanted. And if you refused to give it what I wanted, then I just moved on to someone else. That's how we are. Selfishness and self-centeredness, this is the root of all of our problems. And that word is an interesting word because it doesn't change whether you're a newcomer or 59 years sober like my friend Ed. Is a transient word. It never changes. That's why we do steps 10, 11, and 12. Admitted I was wrong. I promptly admit it. I take my personal inventory. I find out where I'm wrong, where I make a mistake, where I need to say I'm sorry to you. And I promptly admit that. Why? Because selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of all of my problems. Matter of fact, in step 10, I think it's on page 91, something like that, Jason, 90, 91 in the big book, it says, every time I have a problem with you, it's me. I want it to be you. But it's always me. Anytime I push against something, the quicker I push against it and the harder I push against it, I have to examine that more because it's something that offends me. It's something that bothers me that I don't want to overcome, that I don't want to face in my life, that has caused me to push against that thing. So the only thing for me was the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, was the 12 steps. So there was this thing, though, that you have, and it's called honesty. And I just couldn't get past that. Because I was under the impression that the more you knew about me, just meant the less you would like me. And when you end up in a place that is what is considered the last house on the block, being not liked is not an option that you're willing to risk. And so I was convinced that if you knew everything about me, if you knew my deepest, darkest secrets, the adulterer I was, the fact that I walked out on my children, the fact that my mom and dad didn't want me around, brothers didn't want me, no one who knew me wanted me around. If you knew all those things about me, I would be the first person in the history of Alcoholics Anonymous that you would ask not to come back. That's the furthest thing from the truth, but truth is a relative. If I believe it, it's truthful. If I don't believe it, it's not true. It's very simple. You could demonstrate to me all day long, keep coming back. It works if you work it. We hold hands at the end of meetings. But until I believe that you really want me back, you really don't, I would say, yeah, you don't know me. You don't know where I've been. You don't know what I've done. How many of us harbor that feeling, that emotion that prevents our recovery? Because if we're not honest, we're not open-minded, and we're not willing, we're not getting well. We're not going to recover. Because that is the foundation for which our sobriety lies and where our sobriety exists. That's why it says the chapter to the agnostic, our personal adventures, right, made clear three pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And C, that God could and would if he were sought. Those are steps 1, 2, and 3. Everything starts with honesty. That I had to admit I was alcoholic. But before I told you I was alcoholic, I had to admit it to me. Because I could admit it to you all day long and stay as sick as the day I came in. But my friend told me it's 3 o'clock in the morning and the lights are out and nobody else is there. You know what the truth is about you. And I needed to believe it about me before I could tell you. Because I just wanted to pay you lip service. I just wanted to sound like you, to have what you had. But I found out I had to do what you did to get what you got. And man, I wanted what you had. I wanted a place to stay. I wanted hot water to be hot just because I turned it on. Remember that? Some people recognize that. Some people don't. You ever turn on the hot water and it stays cold for 10 minutes and it'll stay cold for a half hour because somewhere along the line you forgot to pay the power bill? Because you paid the dope man or the bar instead? I remember those days. I remember getting locked out of my apartment, pretty swanky properties, where you paid a week at a time. Those are the places I stayed at in Vegas.
Trying to get your shit back?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've been there. Yeah, you know. They don't give it unless you give all the money. And I would get locked out of those places because although it was important that I had a place to stay, it was imperative that I had something to drink. Because drinking by this time became my breath. And so to admit to you and then run the risk of you asking me not to come back was not something I was willing to negotiate. And I remember, see, this is, I can back this up in the big book, but for the sake of argument, we're going to say it's my opinion. Our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. Here are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. The only alternative suggestion, this is the only one, is to go try some controlled drinking. Don't just do it once. Do it more than once. Because somewhere along the line, we have to concede to our innermost self. And I wasn't willing to do that. I rolled the dice on drinking again rather than be open and honest with you. I thought my chances were better drinking than I was being honest. And you know what amazed me, Jason? As I stayed in the hotel room, how quickly I became hopeless again. Within 5 days, I was sitting in my hotel room and I could no longer be an almost. Because when you come from nothing and you are nothing and you're always going to be a nothing, and alcohol would make you an almost. At this point, all the voices I heard in my head were gone except yours. All I could hear was the 71 days I had been sober. It works when you work it. We'll love you until you can learn how to love yourself. Keep coming back, one day at a time. Easy does it. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. All those things that I heard started to repeat in my head. And I sat in this hotel room and I thought, what am I doing? I know if I go back to Alcoholics Anonymous, they really will love me. Because in the 71 days I had been sober, they had demonstrated to me that regardless of who I was, they would welcome me. They would accept me regardless. Because the third tradition is the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. It's not the only requirement for membership is to be sober. And by this time, I had a desire because I knew my alcoholism was out of control and that the only place for me to go was back to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Because my dad, who dropped me off at the hotel, the Rhett Butler Motel of 15th and Fremont, very swanky place. And I'll never forget it, the Sundowner Saloon, which isn't there anymore. Caddy Corner was very convenient for a guy who didn't have a car, didn't have a license, to walk across the street at 3 o'clock in the morning and have a cocktail. That you thought was going to fix you, and you went back to the room and wondered why you're so broken. And my dad, who dropped me off, turned around and said, "Your mother and I aren't going to want you die." That's how far I'd gone. I was going to die, and once again, there was nothing I could do about it. And I went back to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous on April 25th of 1986, and my sponsor, Max Brooks, agreed to be my sponsor again. And I started on a journey that would last this whole time. And again, I wasn't sure that I wanted to stay sober. I just knew I didn't want to get drunk anymore. I just knew the only chance that a guy like me had was to just keep coming back. And I relied on the fellowship of the program long enough to admit that, to concede to my innermost self that I was alcoholic. And I began to admit, because once again they told me, if you're not sure now you're an alcoholic, stick around till one, you'll do till one shows up. And I remember walking into the rooms. Do you ever walk into a room and realize you didn't have to go anywhere else ever again? That's how I felt one day going into the Turning Point in Las Vegas, Nevada. I wasn't ready to admit I was an alcoholic, but I was ready to admit I never had to go anywhere again. I knew as long as I was in the rooms, I would be safe. And I stayed. And at that point, the fellowship rolled over into the plan of recovery. Because fellowship only takes us so far. It says on page 17 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, but that in itself would have not held us together as we are now joined. The tremendous fact is we have discovered a common solution, right? And the solution are the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So when I came in and I finally admitted that I was powerless over alcohol, that my life had become unmanageable, step 2 was almost a relief. You mean this insanity? I don't have to think this way? The thoughts don't have to bombard me all the time? So I went to a lot of meetings, and fortunately I was surrounded, just like you were surrounded, by people who are committed to the plan of recovery. And if you leave this room tonight, we'll be sad, but it's on you. Because we have the elements, we have everything necessary to stay well forever. And I have countless friends who are sober an entire lifetime. I've had friends who died sober and successful and happy and joyous and free, following the same plan that the first 100 wrote back in and published in 1939. There's no difference. Matter of fact, they said we're 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show you how we have recovered is precisely why we wrote this book. We hope that this book is so convincing that no further authentication will be necessary. Check this out. And I'm going to talk about the steps a lot. It says, on the other hand, it talks about the alcoholic. The sensation is so elusive that while they admit it's injurious, they can no longer, after a period of time, differentiate the true from the false, right? So it says, on the other hand, as strange as it may seem to those who do not understand, once a psychic change has occurred, the very same person who seemed doomed, who had so many problems he despaired of ever solving them. Describing anyone here? I think so. Suddenly finds himself easily able to control his desire for alcohol. The only requirement necessary is to follow a few simple rules. Once I admitted I was alcoholic, that my life had become unmanageable, I wanted to know what the rules were. Because I can follow rules. Following rules is a lot better than dying. And when you're in these rooms and you see people leave and never come back, the disease has claimed one more person. But if we're willing to follow a few simple rules, clean house, trust God, work with others. Matter of fact, later on down in that page, Dr. Silkworth, who was a psychiatrist, and a psychiatrist is a psychologist with a medical license, a medical degree, and he was a chief at this one alcoholic hospital. And he said, and this is a shout out to any of you who wonder whether or not you need a higher power. He said, we've done all we can do for you. We've done everything we possibly can do. You need something more than a human power to take you to the rest of the way. That's why when we get to step 2, we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. We don't have to believe yet in a higher power. We just have to believe if there is a higher power, that that higher power can restore us to sanity. And that opens the door, because now we're open-minded. Honesty in step 1, open-mindedness in step 2, and willing in step 3. Became willing to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood Him. And we're not even turning our will. Read the step, understand the step, take the pressure off of yourself, work with your sponsor, work with someone who has what you want outside of money or a hot chick or a good job, right? Although none of those things are bad. But find something that somebody wants, and I guarantee you, they have a relationship with God that will blow you away. Because we who have been sober a while, we rely on God for everything. Everything that we are, every good thing that any of us who have recovered are, or who live in recovery, can point to God doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And so don't be discouraged if you don't have a higher power that you can't see, because we're a very tangible people. If we can't feel it, taste it, touch it, smell it, we don't believe it. And so me believing in something I can't see is down the road. But I can believe in you. I can believe in what's happened to you. Because you tell stories just like me, but you've got a job. The law's not looking for you. You have a license that you can show. You have a car that's not going to be repossessed at 3 a.m. I want to be like you, right? You're not going to get locked out of your apartment. You actually get invited over to family functions. It's like, what's wrong with you? I want that to be wrong with me. And so in the beginning, let the group be your heart. Matter of fact, in the 12 and 12, which was published in 1953, 15 years after the establishment of the Big Book, it talks about in step 11, where in the beginning, our higher power, there's nothing wrong with it being the group. We eventually translate that to a God of our own understanding, something more finite, something more capable than the group. Because the group can only do for us what the group can do for us, but God can do anything. God couldn't, what if He were sought, right? And so we need to believe that. And if there's anything, if you're new or relatively new, that I help you understand tonight, it's don't stress about the God thing. I tell people all the time that it wasn't until March 3rd of 1994 that I came to believe in who I believe in today as my higher power. I was sober 7 years before I finally was comfortable with believing in the God of creation. And that's for me. It can be anything for you. I knew a guy named Jim. He'd say, my name is Jim. I'm a lucky alcoholic. The tide goes in and the tide goes out and I don't get drunk in between. Pretty cool phrase, right? And Laura and I were in Daytona Beach and overlooking the ocean. And I was watching the tide go in and I was watching the tide go out. And After all these years, I finally got what he was saying. There's such serenity. So wherever you find your power, it may be a sunrise. To me, God created all of that anyway. So if you believe in a tide, if you believe in a sunrise, if you believe in a sunset, you're believing a manifestation, a creation of God, which you're almost there anyway, right? But this is where good sponsorship comes into play. And then we start to tackle step 4. My life, if I've done step 3, my life doesn't belong to me anymore anyway. That's why I can be fearless. Because I'll tell you what, if you're sold anything but people who make it do step 4, and the relief coming from step 5 is so sensational, you're going to want to do step 4. You're going to be chomping at the bit. You're going to be telling your sponsor, let's get this thing done. I want to feel that, because we are only as sick as our secrets. And when we get those secrets out, it's like having a bad back and you go to a chiropractor. And you get that adjustment, and you think, man, I didn't know feeling good could feel so good. But that's what should be as a result of step 5. Because God already knows. Last time I checked, he can see in the dark, which is kind of freaky. I already know, because I've admitted to myself at 3 o'clock in the morning, the lights are out and nobody else. I already know my condition. And I'm going to tell a person who's probably done things worse than me, or equal to, or nothing surprises him or her because they've been in the rooms long enough to hear just about everything. So nothing we say is going to be a surprise. We already know, and God can see everything. And then by this time, we're entirely ready to have God remove the defects of character. Aren't you ready? I'm ready. That's why I do step 10 every day. I'm tired of being selfish and self-centered and only looking out for me and waiting for you to say you're sorry before I do. And then the humility that's practiced in step 7 is phenomenal. And it's an ongoing thing. If you understand the steps and understand step 10, we do steps 4 through 9 on a daily basis. Read the big book. Read the big book, and it will spell out what step 10 entails. It entails taking inventory, admitting you're wrong, looking for the defects of character, because saying I'm sorry was always a defect of character. I couldn't get through it. And the shortcoming was actually initiating that. Making a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. I look forward to the opportunity to say I'm sorry, because then I'm done. I'm done with it. So I make a list of all persons I'd harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. If you're going to be afraid of anything, be afraid of step 9, where you actually have to go. That's the step to be afraid of. Don't be afraid of step 8 any more than I was afraid of step 4. Because step 4, all I'm doing is making a list. And if you understand step 4 actually populates step 8. It's already done. When I do step 4, I can just plug everything in. I can just drag and drop that. If you know computers at all, I can just drag it over and just drop it in, and it pre-populates it. And you know what? What I found is that some people want you to be sober. They don't need anything from you. They just want you to stop burning your life to the ground. That's enough for them. But in some cases, we just need to go say we're sorry. Except when to do so would injure them or others. And I don't want to get into a lot of detail. You know the detail, but you know when you're going to harm someone if you tell them the whole truth. Just like in step 5, the exact nature of our wrongs. We don't have to go through and every detail list everything so it's 27 pages long. That's nonsense. We never get it done. Exact nature of our wrongs, just like in step 9. It was enough for my first and second wife to know that I was a terrible husband, that I was an adulterer. They didn't need to know the details. I just needed, this is my opinion, they just needed to know that I knew that I'd let them down. that I knew I wasn't the man that they were expecting me to be. They probably all knew the other stuff anyway, but I didn't have to hurt them by saying, well, I want you to know I did this. I want you to know I did that. You know, again, that's between you and your sponsor and God, but that's my opinion. Because we can clean those things up in step 10 every single day. And as opportunity will present itself, if it's necessary, you'll get an opportunity to make even a greater amends. But one thing that's really important to remember about step 9 is Marshall doesn't have to think I'm not an a-hole anymore for step 9 to be complete. This is very important because a lot of times I'm waiting for you to tell me it's okay before sorry makes a difference. And that's not true. My step 9 is complete when I sincerely go to Jason and say, Jason, I'm sorry that I've treated you the way I've treated you. I was never quite the person that you wanted me to be, and for that I'm very sorry. Jason can still think I'm an idiot. He can think whatever he wants, and that's on him. As long as I've gone to Jason and said with a sincere heart, I'm not that person anymore. I would want you to forgive me. I'm done. And what a relief it is to be done with that. Don't you want to be done with that? Don't you want to have that slate clean? Don't you want to have all the garbage behind you? When you take it out, I have every expectation that every Thursday I take out the trash can and it's emptied by the end of the day. We want that. We want that clear conscience. We want to go into every day asking and asking for forgiveness. We continued. That word continued is a very interesting word. The assumption is that I've been doing it already. That's why it says continue. If it wasn't continued, it would say make a personal inventory and when you're wrong, but it says continued. So the assumption is every step up to step 10 has been an inventory step, and I'm just continuing something I've already been doing the whole way through. And then by the time I get to step 11, what a relief it is, because I admitted I was powerless in step 1. Now I get power back in step 11. But the power isn't for me. The power is for God. And where does God direct me? God directs me to you. I want the story end where, what about me? Is this about me? No, it's not about me. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I have to be willing to be third if I'm ever expecting to be first. And that's just the way it is. There's nothing in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous that allows me to recover that includes me. I recover for others. And as a result of serving others, I get served. That's just the way it is. And I have tried to live this way for a long time. Sometimes I'm better at it than I would think I am. Sometimes I'm not as good as I think I should be. But every day I make the attempt. And every day is another day of my journey. You know, Friday I was sober 39 years. And that was 14,245 days. You know what was a better day? Yesterday. When I was 14,246. You know what was a better day than yesterday? Today. So no matter where we're at, remember your day. Because time is a relative term. It's what we do with today that makes the difference between whether or not we have a tomorrow that is secured. And I want today to be the best possible day to ensure that I have tomorrow. And I'll close with this. A great friend of mine, God, I've had so many mentors around it across the years. And there was a guy named Russian Ted. And I made the fortuitous mistake, I know those contradictory, but it was very fortuitous that I said to him what I said. And I walked into the turning point one day, and my life was upside down. I was still new, relatively new. It was after my relapse. And Ted asked me, how was your day? And boy, he wasn't expecting this answer. And I began to tell him how crappy my day was. This went wrong, and that went wrong, and this went wrong, and that went wrong. And I'm not sure of how long Ted let me talk, because Ted was that kind of guy. He had, I don't know, probably had 20, 25 years, which was a long time. Now, it was a long time then. It was magical. And when Ted let me stop, I finally stopped talking, he said, but are you grateful? And I thought, old man, you didn't hear a word. Something's wrong with you because you didn't hear a word I said. And Ted said to me without skipping a beat, for whatever measure you're grateful for today will determine the quality and the quantity of your sobriety tomorrow. And then without me being able to respond, he turned around and walked away. So wherever you're at today, be grateful for today. If you're clean, if you're sober, there's gratitude to be found. I know your life in many of our cases is upside down. I know that. But stick with the winners, because we know a path that is designed for recovery. We have a way out on which we can absolutely agree and join in brotherly and harmonious action. This is the great news to those who suffer from alcoholism. My name is Robert, recovered alcoholic. Thank you.